Eastman, the Director of Engagement at Geva Theater Center. And I'm here, I'm sure most of you know, if not all of you know, the fabulous Thomas Warfield. The Geva Insights conversations are intended to give context and connect the play to our local city and people. And when I read this play and was trying to decide who would be the Geva Insights speaker, there was no one else in town for a variety of reasons. And we're not going to do bios now because we only have about a half an hour for the conversation. But I'm sure you know how fabulous he is, and there's some things said about him, why he was selected in the program if you don't know him. Yes, they are. You gave them to me. No, but this play is by Harrison David Rivers, and he's our playwright in residence, and I want to mention that because this is somewhat autobiographical for him. And when
autobiographical for me.
And that's another reason. So I'm not going to say any more about that because I want Thomas to talk about why it is autobiographical for you.
Well, let me say first, it's such a brilliant play. Itself is brilliant. I mean, the set design, the sound, the music that they used, and the staging, the acting, it really touched me. Well, I could have written some of that myself. As some of you might know, my mother and father, well, my mother was a minister. So, and my father, was in the church, musician in the church. So, religion was really part of our growing up. I mean, it was just, you were born Christians, or, the baptism, being baptized was a secondary thing. You were already a Christian, so. And so listening to this, there were a lot of parallels. My God, the setting the table. So my mother tested us on the butter knife, the regular knife, the steak knife, the salad fork, the dessert fork, everything. And if you got it wrong, we had to start all over. It was, so that was it. When they started doing it, I still do this. Yeah, I still do this, so anyway, yeah. So, what was really interesting to me, or hit in such a personal way for me, was the relationship with his mother. I had a somewhat similar relationship, actually, with my mom. It was very close to her. Although close, what does that mean? Close. And as they started explaining that thing about close, or not explaining really, I started to think about that too. Yeah, actually. So here's the thing. When I was 14, I had a boyfriend. Now, back in the the 70s, and back in the 70s, that was not, well, actually, we weren't even saying we were gay really at that point. Right. We were talking about homosexuals, and there was, gay wasn't really a word that we were saying. And nobody actually ever said it. And nobody knew Brian was my boyfriend. But he was always around, at the house. And, okay, I gotta tell you this story. When he talked about, so we made out of my mother's car or something. So one night, my dad had an old Cadillac. And one night, Brian and I won't go into all the details, but Brian and I crawled into the back seat of that Cadillac. Everyone else was asleep at the house. Afterwards, we got out of the Cadillac, but I couldn't get the door closed. And I kept, they started making some noise or whatever. And my dad's bedroom was right in the back, and he woke up. And he looks out the window and he says, "What are you doing out there?" Of course, Brian had gone under the bushes by that point. And I said, "Oh, I forgot something in the car. I'm trying to get it. I got it out, but I can't get the door closed." Or something. So anyway, that whole thing up that car was just like, But throughout all those years in high school, my mom and dad never said or asked me, "Are you gay?" or "Are you through high school, the word gay started to come up more, actually, yes, at that time, in the late 70s. But they never said it. And then, I had most of my friends were male, you were females who didn't mind being around gay people, or they were gay men, boys, young guys. And so I always had sleep. Well, actually, I went to high school with Lisa, so she actually knows all of these stories. But
I know when the bodies are buried.
So we would have like sleepovers. Of course, we were all in the same room. And I remember my parents never really said anything about it. Like, nobody ever talked about it. The way at that time, people just didn't talk about that.
Cleopatra, queen of denial.
Yeah, it was even more than a denial, I think. It was a fear of where is this going to go? And how can we even talk about it? Because we didn't have the language to talk about it. And we didn't have the, not the mindset, but, the mindset, I guess, to even discuss this. So anyway.
So his mother had some of that, right? She said some of that, where she knew.
She knew,
but she didn't talk about it.
She didn't talk about it. She knew the whole time, which she told me many years later. But she never said it. And my dad too, actually. But they never spoke about it. And so they're not speaking about it. So yes, there was this sort of denial thing. But also, them not speaking about it made me not have shame about it. Actually. Which is a funny thing, but I did not have shame about who I was, because they never questioned it, even though we were talking about it, they never questioned it, so I didn't really grow. And I think also the music and the performing and all that was a kind of escape from, it was a healing in a way, that I didn't carry around the psychological stuff of that shame or, guilt or, I'm not who people want me to be or whatever that is. So, in a way, I guess, not talking about it worked in my favor.
Do you think it worked in your favor because they weren't ashamed?
Well, also that, yes. So, not only did they not talk about it, but yes, they weren't, or they didn't appear to be ashamed of it, or of me, I should say.
Which is different.
Which is different from that, right, which is very different from this story. However, this story was a story I saw many times with friends. And worse, of course. What was I talking about before that? Oh wait, I gotta tell you about the time. Yeah, okay, so we had sleepovers. So one Saturday morning, there was probably five guys in my bedroom. We're all on the floor and then we're sleeping all over the place. And my mother busts in the room. We're all still basically sleeping. And kind of half clothed, I guess. And my mother says, well, I don't know what's going on in here, but it's not happening in my house. My friends knew her, so it wasn't a big shock to them that she was kind of aggravated. She was very, I like to think now she was very theatrical, but she was very dramatic.
Yeah,
dramatic.
she knew where she was coming from.
Yeah. So, I was like embarrassed, of course. I said, she is. So we got dressed, to go to the beach or something, I don't know. We come downstairs and my dad pulls me aside. He says, I need to talk to you. Oh my God, again? She just yelled at us, He says, this is your house, you can do whatever you want in this house. Your mother can't tell us all what to do. I wasn't either! So, anyway. What else? I don't know what I should be talking about.
I think that we didn't decide exactly what we would talk about because you hadn't seen the play. But I think, just connecting what your experience has been, I think, to what you saw.
So, when he told his parents, I think he said he was 16 or on the 16. Oh, okay, I didn't tell my parents 16, but I did have a boyfriend at 14, and I had another one at 16, and I had one at So, except for the one who passed, I'm still friends with all of them. Anyway, so I moved to New York, 18, 19 years old. Away from the, I got that. I totally got that far here. Yeah, as far away. far away as I could where I could do my thing. So my mother and I would write letters. This was way before internet or,
You don't have FaceTime.
none of that, yeah. We didn't have phones, And so we wrote letters back and forth all the time to each other. My mother wrote long, long letters. This is what's happening, this church is happening, this at church, And so somewhere buried in one of those, 8-page letters is, well, are you a homosexual?
Oh
my God, yes, and I'm like, do I say something? And I'm thinking, do I call and say, no, because I didn't want to confront it. So I wrote back and said, yes, and then I explained how these boys had been boyfriends, and I was in love with them. I was extremely helpless romantic at that. At least I used to have a journal that I wrote everything in from our high school experiences. And so it was all love letters and this and that. But anyway, she wrote back and never mentioned it again. And then neither of them ever mentioned it again. So fast forward, I had a boyfriend who was from Hong Kong. And I brought him home for Christmas. And one morning at breakfast, my mother, my father, and Alan and me were sitting at breakfast. And my mother says, well, now you guys are so quiet at night. She was like, I don't hear anything at all. Well, of course, it's like it's just trying to eat a cereal or whatever, And my dad puts the newspaper out. And my mom says, what did two guys really do, though?
So she did want to know, unlike the character.
Oh my God! I never told her, but I'm sure she figured it out. But yeah. So anyway, that was. But she was such a, my mother was such a dichotomy. On the one hand, she was a very religious person. She was a minister. She was, and not just a minister. I mean, she was the black church. It was really heavy duty. Brimstone and all that fire and brimstone, and yet she had this understanding thing where she could, I want to say empathize, maybe, I don't know if that's exactly the right, but yeah, I felt that from her. For her whole life, I felt that. Even when I did something that was wrong, or I knew she didn't approve of something, I felt from her, though, this. And watching this play made me think about it. It made me think about what a gift it was, because it allowed me to be who I was, without any judgment. And maybe she did have judgment, but I never knew it. Occasionally she would say, "Well, you're going to find a nice girl and have kids and all that." Actually, she almost for the rest of our time, she almost always said that, and every once in a great while. But she really loved all the guys I dated and brought home, and she treated them like they're her kids, So it's a little different, I guess, than this. And I don't know how she got to that place. My dad was already in that place, I think. Maybe he was more worldly, I don't know. He had been in World War II, and maybe. I don't know.
She had a life before you were born.
Huh?
She had a life before you were born.
But that's the one thing I want to bring up too, because you mentioned that, and for people that don't know, your mother was also mature when you were. She also, because she passed away at 102.
Right. Okay. So she passed away at 102 just 4 years ago. So so when she was in her 50s, right? Yeah. She adopted me, although I didn't know I was adopted until I was 36. That's a whole other play. But both my brother and my brother was adopted a few years later, and he was already 3. So he changed his name. So his adoption was a kind of known thing. I was adopted as a baby, so I really didn't know. And the thing is, they always made an effort. They had a lot of foster children. Foster families, really, that lived with us a lot all the time. And they always made a thing about me being their son. So So again, though, this is another little gift. Because when I found out I was, by mistake sort of, I found out that I was adopted, I didn't have any of that sense of who am I, where are my parents, where did I come from? Because I didn't grow up with that. I didn't have any feeling, I mean, I don't know, maybe there's something coming down the road. But so far, I just, because of the strength of my self, I don't know what that is. I'm grounded so much in myself, my self-awareness, or my self-awareness, I don't know.
Yes.
But so I'm very assured with myself in a way, and that's, I think, partly because of how they treated me. I never felt unloved, I never felt unwanted, I never felt guilty about being gay. Yeah, that was a true gift, actually. That was such a great thing that they did for me. So, I don't know. I still have some time, maybe I'll get into
We're
it.
not going to let it Q&A.
Can I ask a question about the play?
Oh.
Was there anything about the play that you felt was off?
Well, you mean off for my life?
No, up here, the play that's rolled out tonight.
No, I mean, that's his life, or taken from his life. So I don't think it was anything really off. And actually, I've seen this play out in so many people's lives. How, one, you can't tell your parents you're gay, you can't share your, in love with your partner. You can't share that you have HIV, you can't, there's all, or the whole thing about being a gay black person having a white partner, that's a whole other, that's a whole other piece of it too, bringing, who's coming to dinner kind of thing. So there's that. And I remember when Alan first went with me to church. Well, first of all, he wasn't American, so he didn't even understand anything about the churches. And then going to a black church, where people are kind of yelling and hollering and jumping up and down. I mean, he was just like, what's going on here? So it was quite a cultural mix. Yeah, I was asking her something.
I was just going to ask you, you mentioned the HIV, and I think that we talked about how when you were young in New York City that you were, and this was a while ago, so the diagnosis was a death sentence at the time when you were working, but just how that complicates the relationship.
Oh my God, it really complicated my relationship with my parents, I think, in many ways at that time. So I moved to New York in 1980 or 81, something like that. So it was just before HIV came on. I think 81 was the first diagnosis. And I volunteered with the Gay Men's Health Crisis was one of the first organizations created to kind of address this issue. Of course, it was primarily all white gay men. Now, let me go back. When HIV first started out, though, it was the lesbians who really stepped up to take care of the men. And that's really in New York, that's what was happening. And they had started a group called AIDS Resource Center, and I first volunteered there. And the volunteering thing was just part of my whole, that's how I grew up. I mean, we would volunteer for everything. We did, we were helping. That's all we know. And it was in my nature. And that group, we would go into people who had HIV would go into primarily men, go into their apartments and clean and read to them, make food, wash this and that, So that was kind of my introduction, really. And I was 18, 19 years old. And so it was such a strange time because for me, New York was this exciting place, going out all night long, dancing and whatever. And there was also this fear everywhere, And then the Gay Men's Health Crisis was started by Larry Kramer and a couple other people. And then I volunteered there. I was actually there were only 2 black people working in the whole place at the beginning. Me and RuPaul. RuPaul Paul was a drag queen at the time, not famous, but he was the receptionist. And then I did all the errands. I had coffee and but we were really the only, and there weren't any women working here at all. That was still a time in those isolation of those things, but yeah. So yeah, and then I think it stuck with me about the help that people really needed. Always stayed with me, and then years later when I was in grad school, that's when I started PeaceArt. And it was really started because we were raising money for orphans in Romania with HIV. That's how it got started. And so then we were just doing AIDS work all for the next 20 years or whatever it was.
Can you talk about World AIDS Day and when it came here and what you were doing with
So
that?
when I was in grad school in 1990, in University of Utah, that's where I started PeaceArt. It was dance art called at that time, and that was it was our first World AIDS Day concert. And World AIDS Day just started maybe in '88, I think, or a couple of years before. And then when I came into Rochester, sometime in the mid-90s, I guess, or came back to Rochester, I created the World AIDS Day concerts here. That went on for the next 15, 20 years. We raised thousands of dollars for primarily orphans in different parts of the world with HIV. But we did a few fundraising money for local HIV organizations. Yeah. Oh, right. There's a question. It's not supposed to be Q&A.
Did you get started in music?
Oh. Well, I was born. I was put into. I was raised in a musical family. So it was everyone in that house did music. There was like you learn to vacuum and you learn the piano. It was really my brother did violin too, but I mean basically you had to do music. That was just given. So at 4 I started piano.
Did you start in a church like Simon did?
Yes. So here's the weird. I don't know. It's weird. My dad was the music director at a white church in Webster, the Webster Baptist Church. My mom was a minister in a black church in the city, and so we bounced from place to place, which was really, one Sunday we have anthems, one Sunday we have gospel. So we kind of grew up like that. My mother began to pull us further out of the white church, though, as we got older. She wanted us to have a different experience and whatever. So at 4 years old, I started piano, and my mother, of course, made me play at church. This is what made me hate piano. Did she make my costumes? Oh my God, yes! Oh, I forgot that part. Well, but at church, she would call me. Well, Tommy's gonna play now, and she's up in the, up in the pulpit, and she would call me up, and she'd open the hymn book and put it on the piano and say, okay, we're gonna sing this now. Tommy's gonna play. And I would be like, oh my God. My brother was good sight reading, but I was terrible. But anyway, I learned quick. So then that piano was kind of a thing, and then I would practice every morning at 6 a.m. My mother would get me up, and then after school, right after school, I would go, everyone's out, and the piano was right at the window, so I could see all the other kids in the street out there playing, and here I am. But anyway, then later on, I had a teacher. Oh, this is funny. This has nothing to do with the play. When I was in first grade, I went to Harley. Just for 2 years, I was at Harley School, and I was the only black kid at Harley at that time. I didn't know it. Fortunately or unfortunately, I didn't know that stuff. Even though my mother was working in the civil rights things, I really, I would sit, and she would take me to meetings with her, and I would sit on the floor with the fight organization. We used to have their meetings in our basement, and my mother was the secretary, and I would just sit there on the basement steps, 6 years old, 7 years old, whatever. Anyway, in first grade, we did a play in first grade called The Little Black Note.
Oh, no.
Yes, it was The Little Black Note. And so I didn't know anything about that though. To me, this was, oh my God, this performing thing was like, this is it. This is what I'm gonna do. Like, I already knew, 6 years old, I already knew it.
So I think that's connected to the play. I think that's connected to Simon. And I will say that what you're talking about, I think this play is about a lot of things, but it's about family.
Yeah.
I mean, it's about family and family relationships too. And I think one of the things that strikes me is that this play it can resonate with anyone, no matter the composition of their family, because all of everything that I'm seeing in there, I could relate to so many aspects of it too. So when you're talking about your family, I don't think you're not talking about the play too, about the dynamics of family.
Yeah, the dynamics are really fascinating. And fortunately, my mother lived so long that I was able to kind of analyze the dynamics, after a while. And it was great to have this opportunity. But getting back, so I started ballet at some point. Sorry, I don't work
Like Simon?
Yes. My dad, who was very open-minded, and the music and everything, but the ballet did seem a little, should he do that? I was in the opera theater, I'm the opera seer when I was a little kid, and it was in one of the operas in Carmen. What act is that? Third act? Second act of Carmen, they have gypsy dance, and I was probably 10, I think, or something, and I was just like, what is that? I'd gone to see it, not back, I guess, whatever. But, I didn't know what this was. And I came when I told my mother, I want to do this dancing thing. And she found, all in the queue, thank God. And I started ballet. My dad didn't take me to class, actually. It was just my mother. Later he did, but in the beginning, he would take me to piano lesson or voice lesson. But he didn't take me to ballet. And it took me a while to figure out, how come he doesn't pick me up for ballet? Like, he's already home, my mother's out doing a meeting or whatever she's doing, I can wait for an hour outside, and it was on Main Street. It was on right across, there was a place there was an old off-track betting place right across from the Eastman Theater. And upstairs was the ballet studio. And there I'd be out in the cold, waiting for my But she used to make my costumes for the ballet performances, and she was a seamstress, so she was fancy.
Did she stay up till 2 or 3 o'clock?
Well, this is because she would make them at the last minute. So after the performance that next day, she hadn't started it yet. So yeah.
Well, it's funny how people can be very progressive about a lot of things and have blinders about other things where you would think that the scene in your bedroom might have triggered your father more than you taking ballet, but it's just funny how people's brains and biases work.
Interesting. They were fascinating characters. They balanced each other out in many ways. And I guess my brother and I, he doesn't like me to say, he's a little like my mother more, and I'm more like my dad. In temperament, I mean. I'm kind of, okay. And my brother's like, what? So that was more my mother. And my dad was like, I'm not saying anything.
So tell us about, I know that having dinners is a big deal to you, so that's something you inherited. So when you were watching this set, and you mentioned how powerful it was and how it struck you, talk a little bit about how
I think that the bread dish was in the wrong place. I think it has to go in the upper part of the thing, right? Yeah, anyway. I can remember my mother getting very angry about us not setting the table correctly. And actually, as we were adults, so I always kept this, because I don't know, somehow it was an aesthetic of it, I guess, I don't know. But my brother's not into it at all, and so when we would go to his house and he didn't have the proper china, or he didn't have the fork, he had the fork and the knife on the same side, my mother would refused to eat. And she was trying to figure out if you fix this table properly. Or if you had plastic, oh, God forbid you had plastic, table setting. So I kind of have a lot of that. but it's a beautiful aesthetic. Yeah, oh yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment. I thought it was really excellent that one of the themes was how they talked about closeness, and the table keeps them, miles from each other. And then at the end, they were sort of in the center to hug. And I thought all of that was just amazing.
So many layers.
So many
Yes,
layers.
so many layers.
And just even the discussion, or not discussion, I guess, about closeness. It was maybe, I was sitting up there thinking, oh, yeah, that's right. You're close, are you close because you tell things to each other, or you don't tell things to each other, or you hug it, you're close, yeah, I mean, there's so many little things there about what is it to be close. Like, I'm actually, I don't really talk about this much, I'm actually a kind of introverted person. I do have a persona, I do have a social kind of, and I probably figured that out from being a performer as a kid or whatever. But actually, personally, I'm somewhat an introvert, and I don't really share a lot of personal, although I do share a lot on Facebook, but I do not share. I really don't share like very intimate personal things, actually. Not even to the people close who didn't take it the test. What was I saying? Oh, because of this closeness idea, it really had me thinking about that. And the table, and the distance about, and I also saw it as, at different times they were different parts of the table. And it was sort of like the levels of closeness, or
Where things stand at this particular time.
yeah.
It
That was
shifted
fascinating.
with the table,
Yeah. The table's like a time.
Did you have any reaction to the mirror?
I thought, reflection of us. That's what immediately I thought. Oh my God, this is all just a reflection of our own lives in some way. That was brilliant.
Yeah.
It was shocking. I did not. At first, I thought, I didn't think they were ever going to open it, and then when they were starting to open, I thought it must be some like skyline, some city or whatever. And then to see ourselves. That was what a brilliant writing. Yeah.
Well, I guess two things, the closeness, but they never spoke to each other. No one spoke to each other directly. Which sort of says maybe they weren't as close. The other thing was the lights seemed to reflect.
Oh yeah, this right?
Okay, well, around here. We're not supposed to say.
I'm not going to touch it.
Oh, you're not supposed to. I think it was screen. It seemed to reflect their feelings, like the term.
Yes, the emotional.
The emotion.
Yes, was in that light. That was so fabulous, wasn't it? And you could really feel that. Yeah. I think the thing about closeness, though, is do we really know what that means? I mean, I think we're always trying to figure that out. And so that was what was so interesting here. Especially when they finally brought it up, I thought, I think we're close, but not as close as you really are, or just closer to some people than you are to others. And
And how
so,
much of it's performative? I mean, I thought that was the question, because remember, it came from the question of people asking, are you close?
yes.
And so how much, I thought a lot of this was, what is performative, what, the whole idea of asking where your mother did ask you, but not asking, about what are the mechanics
Right.
of, as if there's only one.
Right.
But what are the mechanics of your sexual life? All of that seemed to me to suggest that the way that we interact with each other, especially around things we're uncomfortable with, has to do with, and we respond in a performative way. And I think all of her questioning to me were things that were part of her inner struggle
Sure.
with who he was. That
And
was the
who
way
she
I
was,
perceived it.
because I mean,
Right.
we do, our reality is how we perceive it. And so and I think that with my mom grew up in the Depression.
Yeah.
And so, you know, she said, she used to buy cans and cans of, you know, boxes of cans of food and everything and put it in the basement. But because that's her perception of how she was like, her life was, and her experience. And so I had to, as I got to be an adult, I had to kind of understand how she reacted to me or treated me, or was all through her own perception, her experience. It wasn't me, it wasn't really even me. It was really her perception of the situation or whatever it was.
You better wrap up, but I have to say about your mother, because I don't know that I've met anyone of your age.
No.
That was her father was born enslaved.
My father was born into slavery.
That is,
Yeah,
I mean,
I
all
knew
of the dynamics of, I mean, that is, when you first told me that blew me away. I mean, he was young
Yeah.
when he escaped, but your mother was a marvel.
Yeah, she was a model.
I always tell him that I want to be her when I grow up.
That's great.
There are 2 questions and then we're going to stop.
Yes.
I was going to say that I liked how this ended because it gave you the chance, whatever they went through or whatever drama, they had a chance to be able to speak their truth. They had the opportunity to hug and love each other because 20 years ago, HIV was a death sentence. There was no closure between a lot of people. Whereas this allowed them now, whatever these horrible meds that have extended their life, now there are people living with HIV and they have a chance to
That's
have
right.
some closure or relationship. This was a very good
That's
thing.
Yes.
I just wanted to know if there was any, make some comments about the fact that the father never showed up. And part of me was like, maybe they could bring him on. I finally got off that conversation in my head.
I did too.
Who said it? So I have a question. Yeah, somebody just said it. For me, he was there.
He was there.
Okay.
What do you mean?
I think, I'm not going to speak for Harrison, who wrote the play, but for me, he was there. I think that the way that he was there was a statement in itself.
I really love how when the dialogue was that really got you pumping. I mean, it really was like you were in the middle of it. You know, it was just a really great way to do it.
You know, because of the way it was framed, it made me think of Maundy Thursday in the last.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you, Tony.
Oh, you're so welcome.